So I had planned to speak in the beginning and give a certain perspective, but because of circumstances, I'm doing at the end. So you'll have to indulge me. I'm going to try and be as brief as possible. One of the issues which concerns me is that we are coming from a global perspective. You know, this issue seems to be driven currently by what is happening abroad. And what I wanted to do was to give you a picture of the issues as seen from the Indian context, which is probably the reason why the chairperson invited me to chair this session, because I have been working on these issues for about 15 years. So I'm going to give you a very brief history to tie in to the perspective, which we've had. Somewhere in 2001, I was in charge of the PDS, and I came up with this rule. We got some research studies done, and I came up with this 1/3 rule. 1/3 reaches, 1/3 is lost in administrative, and 1/3 in corruption. And it set me thinking about the whole issue of poverty. And what I came to the conclusion was that poverty alleviation has failed. What we should move to was poverty elimination. And I just want to briefly give you this perspective. It's not for praising myself, but I think it's very important to have the perspective which came from India, because the issue clearly was this 1/3, 1/3, 2/3 of the money which was being wasted, right? But looking into it, and I won't go into all the experiences based on things which I saw. I don't have the time, but the one actually I should mention was this issue of drought and starvation death in Kalanidhi. This was something around 2000 or so. And I happened to be in a conference, a government conference, where the food secretary of the state was present. And we asked him, that why is this happening? And his answer was, we don't have the capability to get the food to these people. So given this huge corruption, administrative failure, the thought about eliminating poverty gave rise to this concept of UID. Okay? Both type 1 and type 2 errors. Usually we talk about the type 1 errors, which is that we are duplicating that 1/3 rule, right? But to me, the second point, which was the example I gave you, and the number of schemes, I think Hashib has very nicely given you the number of schemes. If I remember the last time I checked, in fact, in one of your conferences also you gave this, there are like 200 and something schemes. And then we have to talk about people who don't have food. There's something fundamentally wrong with this. So we went through a process, and then we finally set up a committee for setting up this UID. And what we came up with, and again this is relevant to the issues which have been raised, is that the UID system to eliminate type 1 and 2 errors, and then a multi-application smart card. This was in our report, in the Planning Commission report on the UID, which I chaired. And what was the idea? It's the same issue. There are certain quasi-public goods, like education and health, which Subir has emphasized, and then there are welfare programs. So largely, at that point in time, when this was just an idea, there was a lot of conflicting views. You had these studies which you have done. In fact, SEVA has done several of these, which have helped resolve these issues and get into the DBT cash transfer issues. But at that time, there was huge resistance from the left. Professor Guy mentioned this. Huge resistance. So what we thought of was a flexible system, where if you wanted to just give PDS food, you could have in the application smart card, you can have separate applications, okay? Education, if you wanted to give vouchers or an entitlement from the public system or the private system, it was a flexible, the idea was flexibility. But let me mention that in principle, you can convert, and again in this, Subir mentioned this question of we considered this in the PDS report. There's a paper of 2001-2 where we said that in backward areas, in remote areas, we should keep the PDS and have a flexible system, including vouchers, etc. Again, a lot has evolved since then. So, the public, it's possible we talk, health is episodic, right? So in principle, only those who have bad health should get that facility. Well, we also have insurance. You can convert it from an episode into a running entitlement by converting it to cash, which is to be used for insurance. So again, you could either have vouchers or cash. Okay, so that's the overall perspective. The UID has transformed into Aadhaar. We are talking about linking UID to every benefit. It's moving towards that direction which we envisage, and it's very, very important because the money saved you can use on other things. That's obvious, and I'm sure everybody understands that. Now, very briefly, my second point, which is connected more directly to this welfare part of it. I'll leave the education and health. As I said, it's always transformable. You can transform episodic health into insurance. And of course, each has its problems. So as far as direct benefits is concerned, there are, in my view, three issues. One is of incentives, second is of costs, and third is of administration. Now, to complete quickly, I will posit the DBI as defined by professor as a universal amount you give into what we have called a net income transfer or a negative income tax. Okay, I'm just going to give a brief outline to whet your appetite. We had spelled out the calculations in an article in the Indian Express. It's also on my blog for those who want to see it. And very, very quickly, the incentive is like this. The way the negative income tax works is you conceptually give an amount, any amount. It could be the poverty line amount, it could be lower, and that's where the cost will come in, how you shade it, and we have done it in the paper which I pointed out. And then you treat that plus all earned income as taxable income in principle, okay? So you have a continuous stream from somebody who earns zero income to the income tax system, okay? As I said, the details you can read in the paper, but what that means is you incentivize properly. You don't have a discontinuity, because if you're targeting and giving to one person or certain set of people, you get a huge discontinuity at the corner. Here you have a smooth system, and you can ramp up that basic amount as much as you want. But it's the calculation. You actually give out the amount X plus minus the income tax, and everybody gets it. So at some point, you become from being a receiver to a payer. So incentives get sorted out. Well, not completely, of course. Secondly, the cost becomes much more manageable. And as I said, you can raise whatever money there is. You can raise that X. And thirdly, it becomes part of the voluntary compliance system of the income tax. Okay? So we are not checking except for evasion. Just like you check for tax evasion, you are checking for evasion of low income, i.e. under declaration. Same principle. So all the psychological benefits which Professor has quite rightly pointed out, I agree completely, you become part of the income tax system. You are not some recipient, okay? You're just part of that negative income tax. Okay. So, the calculation of cost, just my last point. So we calculated on the amount we gave, which comes out eventually to be much higher, total with the earned income. It's about 4 times, if I remember correctly, at the poverty line. You're actually making much, much more than the poverty line. But the amount needed for the calculations we did was equal to the what is being spent on Manrega and PDS, just the two welfare schemes combined. Let me leave it at that.